So talking about scrappy veteran players.
Someone springs to mind.
Yeah. I thought I would just, play that back.
Yeah. You were very positive in Amsterdam. I felt like you were nostalgic, feeling the love of Amsterdam, enjoying your student days.
Yeah, I know.
Back in UK.
Just brought back the memories, the waffles, the bicycles. No.
Waffles and the bicycles.
No, it was a really good trip actually. Really enjoyed it.
So this episode, I think, let's talk about. Djokovic has made these comments in a press conference in Wimbledon this week, and it's been getting a lot of airtime, and it's really interesting. And before we go too far in, we'll play it, but I think it'd be really interesting to break down and basically see, or what do we think? Do we think Djokovic is right? And so let's play that first, and then afterwards we'll break it down.
And now we have the Padel that is growing and emerging. People kind of have fun with it and say, but tennis is tennis. Tennis is a king or queen of all the racket sports, that's true. But on a club level, tennis is endangered. And if we don't do something about it, as I said, globally or collectively, Padel, pickleball in States, they're going to convert all the tennis clubs into Padel and pickleball, and because it's just more economical. You have one tennis court, you can build 3 paddle courts on one tennis court. You do the simple math, it's just much more financially viable for an owner of the club to have those courts.
So basically, Novak is saying that tennis is in a slight threat from paddle and pickleball, basically the state of the clubs and the tours and things like that. And this is all stuff, this is not news to us. We played the tennis tours, and so we know what that is like for a journeyman on the tennis tour. Yeah. And then also we know what the club situation is like. And I think that clubs, it's very different, tennis clubs, as to how it was when we were growing up. When we were growing up, it's very sociable. And I remember doing it, loads of junior mornings and loads of these things going on. And not just our club, lots of clubs were like that. And it's interesting.
That's probably the same when Djokovic was growing up.
Yeah, it would have been.
It would have been the same era. Yeah, exactly.
And it was in an era where, everyone played tennis for the social side of it. Most of the people playing were not playing because they wanted to be Wimbledon champion or world number 1. And so it's really interesting when the best tennis player in the history of the game, and I think that's almost without dispute now. Okay, you've got Roger, who's very graceful on court. You've got Rafa, who is obviously the king of clay. Blah blah blah. Novak is the best player of all time. Yeah, the most slams, and the mental side. He's won all those slams during the era of Federer and Nadal. Yeah, so the best tennis player of all time has basically said tennis is in a state where it needs to look inward and improve the tour for your, not even your semi-pro players, I suppose you would say, or your lower pro level players. And also we need to work on the club structure. Well,
let's start with the club, because I've had first-hand experience of the tour aspect, but I think more interesting, why don't we discuss the club aspect first? What does he mean by the threat?
I think what would be, but then he goes on to talk about paddle and pickleball and how it's so much easier to play, it's so much more sociable and everything like that. So I think there's almost 2 things he's saying. 1, tennis is struggling, and 2, paddle and pickleball are seen as a threat. And we've had loads of conversations over the years around you can do tennis alongside paddle and pickleball, and there are different ways that you can do it, but undoubtedly, people that may be playing recreational tennis probably will go and play paddle and pickleball to some extent and love the sport and therefore not play as much tennis. And I think it's really interesting. You talk about the club structure and what that looks like. And I think it depends on how developed the paddle nation is. We were in Amsterdam, and in Holland, the Netherlands, paddle has boomed, and now there are great clubs and there is a good structure. And we were there that whole few days that the courts were full, and most of the clubs are like that, and they are really building communities. they're working with the coaches, and the coaches are wanting to learn. I mean, the coaches brought us over. Like, that doesn't happen in the UK. In the UK, we are, as coaches, seen as a threat because the club doesn't want to show up their coaches. And so, you know, I think in very new countries, I would say that in a way, Novak doesn't have to worry, because the people involved in the sport are inexperienced, are new to paddle. They're very enthusiastic, and now with social media, it feels like anyone can go on LinkedIn and make a rant about paddle or give their views on paddle, and it gets shared, and even though they've only been in the game for 2 minutes. But I think in a new emerging country, everyone's trying to work out how it works, and so we go around the clubs in the UK, and you look at the club and you think, yeah, the occupation level is low, there are no coach programs, we see the coach and we think they don't really know what they're doing. But then you go to a more developed country like a Netherlands or Sweden, Denmark, you know, the Middle East, UAE, Qatar, like, to keep naming, Italy, Portugal, all of these that are developed, and you look and you think, wow, what a fantastic club structure they have, good communities, the coaches are you know, to some extent doing good sessions, their way of doing sessions, but good sessions, and the tournaments are full, the courts are full. And so in those areas, you think it probably is a bit of a threat to tennis. You know, there are more people playing tennis in these countries, paddle in these countries than tennis.
Well, the one thing that stood out for me in Amsterdam was how busy it was during the day. Like, when we say it was full, I mean, it was full every single hour of the day, every single court. There were 10 courts. I wanted to film for half an hour on a court. I couldn't get a court. No. I mean, literally, it was full, and I think it's really interesting because we go to other markets, and there's almost this assumption. Well, you say how's utilisation of the courts, and it's like yeah, like really really high. But then you say, okay, what about off-peak hours? Like, oh no, like we'll never fill those. And then you go to somewhere like the Netherlands and you see it, and every single court is full throughout the day. And we were doing the clinics, and the second that clock hit the hour and we were off the court, I mean, there's 4 players immediately trying to get on that court, and it was great to see. But you can see why, when Djokovic makes these comments and you go to these markets where it is booming, you can see why. I mean, you just don't get that in tennis.
You don't get that in paddle in the newly emerging ones. So we don't get that in paddle in the UK, and you definitely don't get that in tennis. I mean, we go to a tennis club, and you know, regardless of the club, it's got a lot of courts. At any time of the day, most of the time, there's 2 or 3 courts in use. You know, you would probably say the occupation must be around like 15 or 20%, and that club there it must be above 90. Yeah. It must be above 90. I mean, we got there when the club opened, and we left pretty much when it was closing. Yeah. And there was the odd half hour where there was a single court. Yeah. And that goes to show the value of community and the social side of the game. And I mean, it's amazing. And it's not just that one club. Like, I think most of the clubs in Amsterdam, as long as the facilities are decent, will be like that.
Let's talk about why we're seeing this with paddle and tennis, and why paddle and pickle are a threat to tennis. For me, the biggest difference between tennis and paddle, when particularly for us, where we've lived it, so we're not looking at this from an outside perspective. When we grew up playing tennis, we started. I think I started at age 3. You started at age 5, and we had tennis lessons from that age, probably once, twice, 3 times a week, until we were at least 14 years old, carrying on. Then we went into performance programs, and of course we took a performance route, and so our route might be different to recreational, but still the concept applies that if you want to be a assured tennis player and be good, like feel comfortable playing matches and basically just getting to a reasonable level in tennis, you need to start having lessons really as a kid, and having them regularly to even play the game in itself. Whereas the accessibility of paddle, it's just so different. I think you can pick up a racket and play, and I think that particularly, I don't want to make this discussion too broad, but I think generally nowadays is people, one, don't have as much time, and two, if they do have the time, they don't want to spend years getting lessons in a sport like tennis to just be able to play the game. I think they'd much rather pick up a racket with 4 friends and go and play a game that they can play straight away. And I just think tennis, it's just too difficult a sport that I think people don't really want to spend not only the time but the money invested in learning to play a sport.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that nowadays there's almost this instant gratification, isn't there? That if you can't pick it up quickly, then you wouldn't spend the time to do it. And attention span is getting shorter and shorter. And tennis is definitely one of those games, right? I've put my daughter, she's 3.5, into a weekly tennis lesson. I'm not doing that because I want her to be a Wimbledon champion. Actually, I don't care if she decides to play tennis later in life, but I do know that the earlier she learns, the easier it will be to learn that sport. And you know, we've lived it ourselves, but also we've coached it. Yeah. I mean, coaching an adult beginner how to serve in tennis goes down for me as one of the most difficult lessons.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, you say, right, let's play this sport, and to start the point, you've got to start with a really complicated technique on the serve.
Yeah.
And then trying to teach someone, A, just to get it in, and then B, to start aiming at, at locations on the box and the technique. I mean, it's just so difficult, and you don't have that with Padel. And use this example this weekend as an example. There was all sorts of different levels, ages, both genders, everything. Everyone was playing and enjoying it, and it didn't matter that most of them could not hit a tennis serve, wouldn't have had the coordination or the technique to hit a tennis serve well, at least anyway. And so it's great to see that they're doing that. And I think that's where pickleball and paddle are popular for the same reasons. They're easy to start playing, they're easy to socialise with friends, you're in a close, a smaller environment on a court, and you can immediately get a little bit competitive. Tennis, you can't get competitive until you've learned to serve and the technique. And then tactics don't come into play until you can string a rally together. Well, for some people, that could be 8, 10, 12 lessons. Yeah. Whereas, we give sessions all the time to new players on a court, and by the end of the first session, they're playing a game and they're loving the little competitive side of it. So I do think tennis has got to really do something at the club level. And is it around the coaching and improving the coaching and making the coaching more active, activating players and making it more energetic and more enjoyable, giving them a faster route to enjoyment and strategy within the game, potentially, but it's not an easy one for tennis.
No, it's difficult. And he also made comments around the tour, and that's something that you and I have both had experience of, the tennis tour. And I think it's really interesting because the paddle circuit has been going on for a long time, but it's now starting to professionalise, and sponsors are coming in and money is being injected into it. And I think paddle can learn a lot of lessons from tennis, I think. And then it does not surprise me that the tennis tour is under threat as well. You look at the pyramid at which money is handed out in tennis, and Djokovic, obviously one of the best players in the world, and he has been rewarded for that a lot. But you look at, if you go down that pyramid, and guys that are 150, 200 in the world that are playing exceptional tennis, they're not getting paid at all. They're barely getting paid enough to even be on the tour. And I just think, the expense of playing on the circuit in tennis. I've coached also high level juniors in tennis, and you speak to their parents, and the parents obviously have no idea about the tennis tour and how much it costs. And you say, oh well, what would it take for my son or my daughter to play on the tour for a few years? And you say, well, that's going to be a 100k plus bill at least to just to go and play on that tour. And the thought of that almost instantly is like, well, we can't do that. And then in a way you think it's a shame, because that's a talented player that isn't going to have a chance of doing it. But it's no surprise that for it to be so expensive immediately makes it elitist, immediately cuts off the majority of people even having a go at playing on the circuit. And I think Padel can learn a lot. Now money is being injected in. I know it's up to this point the money hasn't been in the same scale as Padel, but I do think that there has to be at least a thought around how can you grow the game, inject money in, but make it so that even players at a lower level can make a living. Because when the other thing with tennis is that not only is it expensive to be on the tour, but you might as well say, actually, if I don't get to within top 100, not only am I got to pay all that money to even get on the tour, but I've got to get to top 100 basically to make any money from it. So if you're those players like myself, I got to around 400, I was losing money unless I won the whole tournament. I'd lose money each week, and it's just unsustainable. So it honestly doesn't surprise. I think this conversation is great because it's related to Padel and Pickle, but the tennis tour conversation really, I think, is well overdue. And Djokovic is coming to the end of his career. He's made a lot of money, and it's one of those where you look back, isn't it, now? I mean, really, a lot of those top guys, I think, could have been looking at this a lot earlier. But when you're on the tour and you're...
Well, what's quite nice about Djokovic is he speaks out. He speaks his mind, doesn't he? And so, I know that rubs a lot of players up the wrong way, or a lot of spectators up the wrong way. But he's saying it like it is, and it is like that. And Padel will be interesting because if you think about even the club structure, so much of it is private investment. And so now already you're looking at like the PPL in the US, and the pickleball have their own super leagues, and in Sweden they have their own privately sponsored tournaments. And so players like the PPL in the US are obviously not the top guys, and the level is slightly lower, but there's decent, they're getting decent prize money, and the other A1 circuit, they're also getting decent prize money. And so there's got to be a little bit of a clean up, I think, in Padel in terms of what players can play, because already from 2 years ago they're doing double the amount of events and things like that. But so there needs to be a bit of a clean up, but at the same time there are lots of other opportunities for people to play, and I think probably you could, I don't want to say earn decent money because it really depends on these events, but you could enjoy that tour, I think, probably a little bit more at this stage. But definitely Premier and FIP need to have a good look at what's happened in tennis and make sure they don't fall into that trap.
I think it's really difficult because the top players, the ones you see on the TV, the ones that are selling the rackets, the ones that are the superstars, they deserve to be paid and rewarded for that. But if you ignore the rest of the tour, which really is the foundation to allow those players to even be there in the first place, if you don't look after the majority, the foundation of those other players that perhaps aren't the superstars, you'll see what happens in tennis. Now, tennis players are thinking, well, I'm not going to bother trying the tour, it's too expensive, the odds of me making it are so slim, I'm not going to do it. And eventually the long-term health of the tour just deteriorates. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens with tennis. I'm really interested to see that, but also how Padel and Pickle as well develop also from a professional level.
Yeah, and talking of those players that stop on the tour, I mean, they're the ones we're trying to get into Padel, aren't they? And particularly like in Great Britain, where it's
thinking
emerging.
Djokovic.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking Djokovic. I'm more thinking of those journeymen who are 250, 300 in the world that might stop tennis.
Yes.
Those are going to be our next kind of, especially for a country where we haven't got the infrastructure in place yet, but those will be our next strong group of players. So those ex-tennis players like yourself, or ex-college players that we want to try and convert, and create a wider like GB squad, for example. That's what we'd be looking for.
But I think that's really interesting as well, because if you look at, for example, France is a great example of this. Well, we lived in France, and you coached me tennis in France, and a big part of that coaching was playing national French tournaments, tennis tournaments. And what's really interesting in France is when players play on the tour and then end up semi-retiring or coaching, they still play these French league tournaments. And what that does is it raises the level of those tournaments really, really high, because even now, if I pick up a tennis racket and go and play, I might not be ranked 400 in the world, but I'm still playing a pretty decent level, albeit the fitness isn't there. But what that does is it means all the juniors and people that I might play in these national tournaments, it's great for them because they're being exposed to that level, and it just raises everyone's level. Now, it'd be interesting because in France, that's how they were able to produce so many good players, because their retired players still kept on playing, because there was money in those tournaments. And the French Federation is just so smart in how they kept,
I love that system.
kept
that
those players
system.
in. And you would, because as a player, you love competing. For me, when I finished tennis, and really there was nothing. There was no reason for me to keep playing tennis in this country, because it was like, well, what's the point? Like, the national tournaments aren't really funded as much as, say, in France, and there aren't that many tournaments locally that I can play. So it'd be
yeah, well, you kind of think, what's the point? I was the same after the tennis, playing decent level of tennis, but I thought, well, there's no point me entering these tournaments. So I'm going to lose money, like you say, and do that. But
I was just going to say, all those players now, though, what you're saying is, instead of going back into tennis, those players, especially in these countries where there isn't that system like in France, they can just jump over to paddle, which again is not great for tennis.
it's not great for tennis, but you know, a paddle tournament is much more enjoyable. It's much more sociable, and you know, if they can put a bit of prize money in it and start building it, then it'd be great. We need to work on that though, because right now I won't go and play a paddle tournament in the UK because it will be, you know, a 3 or 4 hour drive, and by the time you've done that and got your hotel and done all that, and you win £100 for the prize money, it's not worth it. And therefore you got loads of like juniors that go and play it, or lesser players that play it, and therefore, you know, you're not doing what the French system was, which is basically blooding all of the junior players and getting them to play against your scrappy, experienced, you know, ex-pro players, and they got better for it. And so it's I think the tournament system is hugely important in a country or even in a club, really. Like, you want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to either watch the pros or the highest level of that club, but also to experience it sometimes against them as well. Yeah,
that'll be really interesting to see. And I like the fact Djokovic has come out and said that. Like you said, he's speaking his mind, and let's see what happens. But it's interesting that now that he has come out and said that, I'm sure there'll be more talk in those higher circles in tennis about this topic. So let's see what happens. So talking about scrappy veteran players.
Someone springs to mind.
Yeah. I thought I would just play that back.
Yeah. No.
So you've got the Euros coming up.
Yeah, got the Euros coming up, and I'm excited for that. It's in Cagliari, I think, in Sardinia, and it's in a couple of weeks time. And I mean, I love competing for Great Britain, and this will actually be my 10th year, I think, like competing for them. And each year it gets more and more challenging, not just because I'm getting, you know, older and older, but the level is getting higher and higher. And so this Euros is going to be strong. Lots of, we talked earlier about ex-tennis players coming, but lots of young athletes that are doing this. And so, I'm looking forward to it.
How much does experience play a part in these events? Because obviously you do have that experience over probably most of the players there, I imagine. So how do you use that? Is that just kind of innate, or it's just there?
I think experience in paddle is so important. I remember when I was starting and I first started playing for Great Britain, and I still was quite experienced because it was after my tennis tour, and so I'd played lots of matches at that point, but I was new I was green in paddle terms, and so I would go and I didn't quite understand like the depth of the tactics or the mental side, and so I think it's hugely important now, just understanding that the flows of matches and the repetition. And I do definitely think, I think tennis is one of those games where you can be really physical and aggressive and you can win your match, but paddle you can't. And so to be a wily, experienced paddle player, actually, as long as you're physically fit enough, is you can cause a lot of problems. And me playing on the right, that is pretty much what I'm going there to do, is to try and disrupt the rhythm of my opponents and to make their life a little bit difficult and make my partner's life a little bit easier to try and finish the points. And so and and it'll be hot conditions there, which from my time in Dubai and various other places, I will enjoy and I'll be used to, and I'll use the outdoor conditions to my benefit. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. As long as physically I can hold up for the week, I should be fine. I mean, I'm doing a 5-6 days of training and matches before going, and then we're going there a couple of days before, so we'll be used to it by then, and hopefully I'll be in more rhythm, because you know what it's like. We go and give these clinics at a club in a country, and when we spend that many hours on court giving clinics, the last thing you want to do is go back on court and train. You're exhausted anyway by the end of the day, and there's so many conversations and stuff in between with people, it ends up being tiring. So I'm actually really excited to spend a week of just focusing on playing, and I always, I look forward to that week every year.
How's your game changed as you've got older? Now, I mean, I don't want to position that as, as a question that is mentioning your age, but as you've got older, has your game changed, or do you somehow conserve your energy? I'm also thinking for those listeners that perhaps are a bit older, because I also look at padel and I think you can keep playing the game till your 40s, 50s, but
the Vets Tour
very
is massive.
well.
The Vets Tour is massive.
Yeah. But not. I also think to a level that is very, very high still. I think if you look at other sports, like tennis, for example, as you get to 40s and 50s, your shoulders in pieces. You haven't really got that serve anymore, and so that already is a massive disadvantage. But so. And also, let's be honest, you haven't had the training that you would like. So how do you go into these tournaments, given that perhaps your fitness isn't where it was 10 years ago, and perhaps you haven't trained as much? Do you change your game slightly going into these?
Well, I think in terms of changing my game, I mean, the first 3 or 4 years or 5 years, I played on the left. So I love playing on the left, and I was fast and fit enough that I could easily play that left court game. And then I reached a point that was like when I was, say, 35, that we played, I can't remember which Euros or Worlds it was, but we played and every left court player we came against could just kick the smash back to their side, or, regardless of, how good you thought your lob was. And then at that point I was like, I need to move to the right, because it was just so physical in terms of the power on that smash. And a lot of them were indoor and not necessarily very high in terms of ceiling, so you didn't have the use of the conditions. And then as I've got older, it's not that I've thought I need to conserve energy. I've just thought that I'm going to play this in a more strategic way. And I think if you look on the tour, like now, I would play more like a Dineno type player, or Sanya. Sanya would be great, wouldn't he? But play like that type, like a game maker type of player. And even, I mean, in our clinics, we're always saying to people, why are you rushing in and back and in and back and in and back in one point? You're exhausting yourself by not choosing the right ball to come in on. So, I'm definitely play a more patient game from the back. And then when I do come in, I try and make it a punchy move forward to try and set my partner up. And yeah, if I do want to conserve energy, I might use the lob down the line a little bit more to get my partner more involved, but definitely more patient. Every year, more patient and less and less tennis. You know what it's like in tennis. You get a short ball and you think, point over. But in padel, you go from full attack to full defence to full attack in a point. And so it's more and more like retracted in a way that I'm more objective about the point. If I hit every shot with the intention on that shot, I'm not thinking I need to finish on the next one or the one after. It's more like kind of patiently taking shot by shot. If that answers.
Yeah, it's interesting because tennis is the flip side of that, really, isn't it? As you get older, you probably need to be more attacking to try and finish the points.
Yeah, well, you go into a match thinking, I need to start this fast. I'm going to, I might return serve because my return is going really well. I want to break straight away and I want to, take the game to them. Whereas you just can't do that in padel. Yeah. Like even if you do that in padel and you have a successful first or second game, guarantee you won't be able to keep that up, even for a set, let alone a match. And so, yeah, it's completely different. You got to take your time, be patient, like get yourself into the game, and almost going 3-love down in paddle means absolutely nothing because you change ends and anything can happen. So it's being aware of that, I think. Well,
we're going to look forward to checking in on how the Euros goes, and also the training leading up to it. I think that'd be interesting to know how you get on and how the body feels getting into those.
You're very concerned about that
5-6 days training.
Ice baths, hot water bottles, hydration tablets. Yeah. It'll all be coming out. At least I'm not at that stage where I'm just strapping up every part of my body to play.
Not
yet.
Yeah, I was going to say, not yet. That'll be the next podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll keep you posted, and hopefully, I mean, some of it might be streamed. Hopefully not against Spain, so because that's always a drubbing. But no, I'm really looking forward to it.
Sandy, it's always a pleasure to be on the podcast couch again. And if you do have any questions on today's podcast, or you have any topics that you'd like us to discuss next time, do drop them in the comments, and like and subscribe, because that always helps with the podcast, and we really appreciate it. And Sandy, we'll see you on the next one.
See you soon.